Well, good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome to the Daily Word. I'm Pastor Kyle. We're going to be continuing our study through 1 Corinthians, and we're going to be in chapter 7 today. It is a long chapter. There's a lot to cover, so I'm going to do my best just to try to survey the general ideas here. And really what this section here is about living obediently before God, whether you're married, whether you're single, or whether you're betrothed or engaged, and how to do that, how to play that out. The Corinthian church was in all kinds of turmoil when it came to sexual ethics and sexual immorality, and those kind of things were not only creeping into single people's lives, but also into married and betrothed people's lives. So as Paul starts, he begins by first saying, the matter that you expressed to me, which is it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. Paul's relating here to an idea that the church got it in their heads, this kind of Platonic idea that the flesh was bad and any desire of the flesh was bad and only the spiritual was good. So even married people were denying each other sexual rights. So Paul gets into this and he says, no, listen, your body as a husband, your body as a wife doesn't belong to you anymore. God created sex as a union in marriage back in Genesis, and this is a good thing. Not only that, it serves the other person, and as we see in verse 5 here, that it protects you from temptations. That's, Paul says there's occasion to agree mutually to just devote yourselves to prayer for a few days, kind of a thing, but then to quickly come back together, sexual relations, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. So the idea here that sex in marriage is a good thing, it's pure, it's holy, it's meant for pleasure, it's meant for service of the other person, and it's meant also to prevent the other person from falling into temptation. And then Paul says, now, as a concession I command that not a command I say this, I wish everyone could be like me. The reason he's saying this, he's not saying he wishes everyone could be single. He's really saying, I wish nobody had to deal with this temptation. I'm single, I'm meant to be single, I don't want to be married, don't have those desires, and I can give my life to the service of the church. How wonderful would that be if we had millions of people dedicated just specifically to gospel ministry with no issue here? But that's just not reality, and that's not how God created us, and Paul knows that, and he's explaining that. He goes on to just give a charge here that if you're married, in the rest of the first part of chapter 7, that your call is to stay married and to be faithful to your spouse. If you're single, you're not to live discontent. Now, that doesn't mean that your station can't change, and you may want to be married one day, and that's a great thing to desire, but be content and use your singleness for the glory of God. That's what he's saying in this section here. He goes on to talk about kind of concessions and divorce, and if you're married and maybe one spouse gets saved and the other one's not saved, or if you marry an unbeliever and then after a time that unbeliever decides they don't want to stay with you anymore and they leave, then Paul gives the clarification that the believing partner should let the unbeliever go, because God desires peace. And when you're unequally yoked like that, it sometimes isn't the most peaceful situation. So if the unbeliever consents to stay and decides to stay, wonderful, stay married. Use your marriage as a witness to the gospel for that person. But if they decide to leave, then you're free in that. The next section, just his whole point in this is to live as you're called, right? And he says, only let each person lead the life, in verse 17, that the Lord has assigned to him. Now that assignment can change, right? If you're single, the assignment can change to being a married person. If you're married, the Lord could take your spouse home and you could be single again. So that assignment can change. And the point is, whatever station you're in, don't be discontent, because discontentment drives us to seeking something that God has not designed for us in that moment, whether it be a sexual expression or whether it be just a desire to be alone and have freedom if you're married. Only, he says, God has called you for a reason. And Paul says here, and this is important in verse 21, do not be concerned about it, but you can gain, whether or not you can gain your freedom, avail yourself of the opportunity. And that's really the whole point here, is use your station in life, whether you're single, whether you're married, whether you're widowed, whether you're remarried, whatever it may be. Use it. You avail yourself of the opportunity to glorify God with your life. And that's really what he's saying. Then we get into a section here about the unmarried and the widowed. And he talks about the betrothed. He says, now concerning a command from the Lord, I don't have one for you, but I give my judgment as some who by the Lord's mercy is trustworthy. And he goes on to talk about the idea of being betrothed and whether or not that's an issue of the conscience or whether it's binding as a contract. And he really wants to make it clear that if for example, parents are just trying to hold on to their children and say, no, you can't get married, obviously sinful once they reach an age where they have the ability to make that decision themselves. Parents should help to give guidance and counsel and wisdom, but if somebody decides to marry and there's a godly marriage there, then the parents should consent to let that person go and live their life in a married life. But if a betrothal happens or an engagement happens, that's not a legally binding contract. If somebody decides in here that, you know what, I just want to dedicate my life in service to the Lord in singleness, then Paul says, let that betrothed person be single. And he says, he goes on to say, if anyone thinks that he is not behaving properly toward his betrothed, if his passions are strong, and it has to be, let him do as he wishes, let them marry. It is no sin. If there's passion there, that's they're burning for each other, and there's going to be sexual immorality if we're not careful. And if it's delayed too long, or if the parents are standing in the way, or if one of the betrothed is just saying, no, let's just keep putting it off, you either need to let that person go or get married for the sake of purity. Again, this is all in the sake of service to the other person and purity. We don't want to let any, Paul says elsewhere in Scripture, make no provision for the flesh. Right? We don't want to give in or allow ourselves to even be in that situation. So again, this whole section is about living content with your station, living content with how you are. And if you're meant to transition to a new station or a new assignment, then do so with the assurance of your conscience. And if your conscience is not allowing for it, if you're single and you're meant to get married or you're betrothed and then you decide to back out, that's okay. If you decide to move forward and get married, again, assuming it's equally yoked, God-honoring marriage, then go right ahead. If you're not of age and your parents do not give consent, then you need to wait and listen for your parents' wisdom and advice. Parents, if your children are of age, you need to be giving them the wisdom and the counsel they need to find the right spouse, not to hold them back and keep them from getting married, should that be something that is a good thing from the Lord and that they pursue. So again, Paul finishes up here, a wife is bound to her husband as long as he lives, but if her husband dies, she's free to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. Yet in my judgment, she is happier if she remains as she is. I think that I too have the Spirit of God. He's expressing, listen, I know how good it is to be single and live my life for the glory of God. If you're single and you don't have to get married, that's fine. That's good. But use your life for the glory of God. Gospel ministry, missions, however you can dedicate all of your time and your focus to serving the local church, to giving your time to the Lord. Because guess what? The Lord is going to repay that in eternity with blessings multiple times magnified for you. But if you're meant to be married, then live your life in service to your spouse. If you're betrothed and engaged and it's a good thing to maybe speed that along and get married for the sake of the service to the other person, so that they don't sin in their flesh or burn with passion the way that Paul says here, but that you can then live together serving one another in that beautiful union of marriage that God ordained back in Genesis to be a good thing, right? He looked at Adam and said, man, it's not good that man live alone. So that's kind of a normal thing, that we should want to get married and propagate and have children and grow the church that way, to raise them in the fear and discipline of the Lord. And if that's not you, that's fine. If that's what God has assigned for you, that's great. Just know that you need to, Paul's main point here, I think, is found really in verse 21. Avail yourself of the opportunity. If you're single, love the Lord, honor the Lord, give him your life. If you're betrothed, get your heart ready to be married and to give your heart to that person. If you're married, live in selfless affection for the other person, serving them with your life, with your body, with your motives. And if the Lord changes your station, then be content knowing that God has a plan for you that is good, that is gracious, and that will ultimately bring him the most glory. So hopefully you've enjoyed that study. I know that's kind of a quick overview. There's a lot here, but that's what we got for you today. So join us again tomorrow, Saturday morning, for 1 Corinthians chapter 8 as we continue tomorrow. Have a great day.